Well, good morning. I'm going to talk about a Jeep. I've mentioned this Jeep 2, 3, 4 years ago, but this situation is interesting enough to where I kind of like to revisit it with some better uh, slides and things. And so, if you hadn't seen this before, you hope you'll get something out of it. Even if you have, I hope you'll get something out of it too. This guy was a soldier. He was a local Army guy. We got an Army base close to here, and he had bought this thing at a sale with 33,000 miles on the clock. Actually, he bought it from a local car dealer who had bought it at a sale, and it was really clean. It looked like just that's an actual picture of it right there. It was a beautiful ride. The engine oil was really fresh when he bought it, and he drove it 6,000 miles after he bought it before he had the oil changed. But immediately after the oil changed, the oil pressure was too low. I mean, the oil pressure was just, it was bad. It was a bad situation. And so the oil change was done at a tire shop, belonged to a friend of mine, so he called me and told me about the oil pressure problem. So my question is, where would you start in a situation like this? Well, my advice to him was to have his guy remove the oil pan, remove the oil pump, apply air pressure to the gallery, and listen to see where the air was escaping. That's what you do. You look up there and you hear where the air is hissing out a lot, then you can tell where the oil pressure is being lost. Because if the bearings are worn out or something, you know, and it's got pressure loss, you're gonna you're gonna have oil squirting out when it gets thin, and that's going to cause the pressure to drop. Well, the tire shop didn't do any of that. They just placed the oil pump, the pan gasket. The pump rattled when they shook it, but I didn't get a chance to see the pump, so that irritated me a little bit because I told them I wanted to see it. Well, at Jeep school in Atlanta, Dick Kennedy, who was the instructor there, told us that some of the Jeep Cherokee 4-liter engines have an oil gallery pressure relief valve built into the oil filter instead of the pump. Okay, so he told us if you put the wrong oil filter on one of these, you'll destroy the engine. I have not been able to verify this, but I do know that there's two 4-liter engines that were destroyed by a local quick change outfit that we had to swap out. They changed the oil, engine locked up, and they had the oil change place had to pay us to put engine in there because they put the wrong filter on there. They came up here for that reason. Well, the oil filter was the right one for that engine. There was nothing wrong with the oil that had been used. The sending unit had been replaced to no avail. The customer had taken the Jeep to another shop for a second opinion. The repair shop checked the oil pressure, gave them one choice. They need a $5,000 engine. So here they were, stuck with an engine, with a vehicle they couldn't sell and they couldn't afford to drive because it had low oil pressure. Well, you can kind of see the shop's point because they didn't know what was going on in there, and when shops rebuild an engine, the shop has to warranty the engine, and if something goes wrong, the engine it's got to come back and they got to do the work. My dad for years would warranty all of his I think his engine overhauls he warranted him for 3 months or 3,000 miles or something like that. And there was one guy that he built thousands of engines. I'm not kidding. Over the 30 years he was in the business for his health, and he said that this one engine came back and it was locked up. There was no oil in it, but there was no leak, and there wasn't any sign that it had been burning oil. And he was absolutely convinced that that guy took the drain plug out of that engine and drained the oil out of it, and then ran it until it locked up just so he could get another free rebuild or whatever. So my dad did that free rebuild, knowing that he was being burned on that deal, and he told the guy just to take the car and never come back to his shop for anything else. He was as good as his word. Didn't have any proof the guy had drained the oil out of it, but there was nowhere else it could have gone. And so that was one of those annoying situations. Anyway, I kind of got off on a tangent. But that shop said they needed to put a long block in it. See, that protects the shop. So you buy it from Jasper Engines or somebody like that. They guarantee it, and then you put it in there, and if anything's wrong, Jasper Engines will typically pay the labor and pay for whatever. And so that's in the defense of the shop that tried to sell him a $5,000 engine. I understand where they were coming from. Well, it came to us, and I told the guy, he said, how can I get it over there? I said, pour a bunch of motor honey in it, STP oil, little thick stuff, so that it'll have oil pressure and drive it over here. So that's what he did. And so what we did was we pulled the oil pump off, which left this right here. We put blower into that hole right there, and we blew. Applied air pressure to the nozzle. We pressured up the oil. You can actually take the oil pressure sending unit out and do the same thing. You know what I mean? So think about that. Although, if you don't have it where you can see where the oil is leaking from, then you may hear the hissing, but you won't know where it's coming from. We had a Dodge pickup one time that was a 78 model, and it had a 318 in it, crew cab, when I was working down in Texas. The truck wasn't all that old, but it was out of warranty. And it was losing oil pressure. And so I was thinking, well, it's not making any noise, and they need to use the truck, so I'm going to go ahead and I put a manual oil pressure gauge on it so I could watch. But the oil pressure was really lower than it should have been. And because the truck belonged to the company, I just told the guys that were driving it, that were the crew that was driving it, to just keep driving it. Well, the thing cratered, you know, completely, engine completely came apart. And so what we determined was the crankshaft had broke, and the crankshaft had to have been cracked, and that had to be where the oil pressure was going. And when the crankshaft finally broke, then we wound up, I upgraded it to a 360, which had put a different oil pan on it, but it was plug and play pretty much, bolted it right in there. Anyway, that was something else that came to mind here. Now the oil system on a 4-cylinder shown here, you got the pump, pumping it through the filter, leaves the filter, there's your oil pressure sending unit, goes to this oil gallery, pretty much, and it goes, these holes drilled through the crankshaft, you know, feed it to the bearings, so that there's always oil, pressurized oil feed everywhere. And then it goes up here to the camshaft. Now this is an overhead camshaft. Just basically, the engine we were working on was the camshaft within the block. But this is an overhead camshaft engine. And I talk about, you know, there's this, right here, there's a cylinder head right here, and that's why you got to have this pressurized oil loop going up here. But once again, it's the 4-cylinder, it's not the 6-cylinder we were working on, which was configured differently, but I just figured I'd use this because it's a nice, concise little deal. And then you got a pressure relief valve, you know, right here that I put in there too, so tried to make that anatomically correct. So the air we applied to the oil gallery through the pump was hissing out around the cam bearings. Again, this is a, you know, basically not the same engine exactly, but you see the point. When we put air pressure in here, we could hear it hissing out really loud around the cam bearings. And so that means the cam bearings were wore out and they were loose. The cam bearings are the last, I mean, are the first thing that's going to fail if you're losing oil pressure. A lot of times you'll hear, if it's got hydraulic lifters, you'll hear them clicking, you know, and stuff like that. And then, these are going to get, these cam bearings are going to get wiped out. Now the ones that have the overhead cam, in a lot of cases, won't have cam bearings. They'll just have cam, you know, the cam will be spinning in saddles on the block and it'll have caps on it. I never really understood why they don't go ahead and put cam bearings in there. It seems like a little extra machine work. You'd have something you could replace there, and it would be better than just spinning them in aluminum. The cam bearings are typically the first bearings to fail. I said this a minute ago. When the oil gets hot, it gets thin. The loss of pressure to these bearings, which failed because of the original bad oil pump, was enough to drive the pressure to zero on a hot engine. So here we are. We had to pull the engine out of this doggone thing, and had to pull the whole front off of it, radiator off, and all that kind of thing. Eventually had to pull the hood off so we could raise it out of there. So it had to come out. You couldn't replace the cam bearings in this one. Now I've, you know, it's hard. You can't replace the cam bearings in any engine without pulling the motor out. On this one right here, we had to pull the head off and all that. Cam bearing journals measured within specs. They weren't worn. The timing chain only had a little bit of slack in it, so we went ahead and put it all back together with new cam bearings. This was a picture of one of the cam bearings and the wear that it had. It had, you know, basically started to wipe it out. However, you got to be careful. Now this and this is not the only engine where this is true. The cam bearings on this 4-liter look almost exactly alike, but they're selective in size, and they got to be installed in the proper journals. OEM bearings are color-coded. Aftermarket bearings have part numbers. You can talk to the Perfect Circle people there. And this is how they go, you know. You got bearing position in the front, supports the cam gear and thrust plate. It's slightly bigger, usually about 10 thousandths going down as you go back. But if somebody just starts grabbing cam bearings at random and trying to put them in there, they're going to make a mess. And you're going to have another set of cam bearings. So don't go there. They'll be confused because of the fact that some of them won't fit right and all that kind of thing. It's a disaster if somebody doesn't understand this and just starts popping them in there. So you got to get the sizes right. Steel Power told me, because I saw that the Steel Power bearings we bought didn't have color codes like the ones I was used to seeing at the Jeep dealer when I worked there. But the Steel Power guy says the part number stamped on the bearings are sequential, and the highest number rides in the rear of the engine, which the highest number is the smallest bearing, and subsequently descending numbers go to the front. And well, like other 3 journals, whatever. Anyway, the rear bearing is the smallest. Now, with the new bearings in place and air pressure applied, we had a lot tighter gallery than we had before. We didn't have any leak of pressure there. And with the engine reassembled in place, the gauge showed 60 psi cold oil pressure. After driving it for almost an hour, the oil pressure was hovering at hot idle, just over 30 psi engine hot. So basically, we had a good hot engine, we had good oil pressure instead of it dropping to 0 like I had done before, and that was a good rule of thumb. Now, I was going to pause just for a second here. Some of these V6 Buicks that I used to work on back in the 70s, and I guess a lot of them, they oil pump is actually mounted down there where you can take a plate off and see the gears, and that's all you got to do. And on the distributor, is in there at an angle, and it drives the oil pump. And what would happen sometimes was if you drain the oil, you get the engine hot, drain the oil, and you put it all back in normal oil change, you go to crank it up, and it wouldn't have any oil pressure because the pump had lost its prime. I mean, I saw that a few times on those late 70s Buicks. And so what we would have to do was take that plate off the oil pump and smear grease all over those gears so it could get a prime, and then put it back up. Put that back on there, fire it up, and it'd pick up a prime every time. But I talked to a couple of weeks ago about some of these Cadillacs. The Cadillac guy at the Cadillac dealership told me about this. He said they'd lose their prime. Just be parked, go in the store, come out, and oil pump would lose its prime. And so the only way they could get it to get the prime back is put 20 quarts of oil in the engine, crank it up, force it to get a prime, and then drain it back down to 5 quarts of oil. I never experienced that, but like I say, a guy that worked at the Cadillac dealership that I know really well explained that to me. I thought that was pretty interesting, but it kind of makes sense when you think about it. When you want to force an oil pump to get a prime without having to take everything apart, that works. Of course, you're going to have to buy all that oil too, Well, the Jeep returned tens of thousands of miles later with a new problem, and we'll talk about that next week, and it's more interesting than this one. But I hope you guys got something out of this. We've only been here just under 14 minutes, so this was a quickie, and I thank you guys for tuning in. Let me know what you think about it. Talk to you next week.